Well, welcome everyone to Beauty Call Podcast. I'm Janice McQueen, your host. I have David Doerrier with me today, and he works with trainers, facilitators, sales organizations, and other presenters that are struggling to engage and impact their audience. The lack of engagement in any presentation will cause your audience to tune out, forget you and your message, and will undoubtedly not buy from you or take the next step. As an expert in the adult learning theory, David works with his clients to incorporate 8 simple principles that are guaranteed to motivate any audience to listen, act, and be more likely to retain your information, take a next step, and purchase your product or service. David is a seasoned Toastmaster, proficient instructional designer, train the trainer and facilitation expert, voiceover artist, classroom facilitator, and professional Santa Claus. Oh my goodness. I love that. He's very much my reader. I think it's just so cute. Please welcome to the show, David. How are you?
Thank you, Janice. It's so wonderful to be here.
It is so great to finally get a chance to connect. And for those of you listening, we connected a little bit later in the day. So he is so great. He is here at 10:30 at night. So you're very dedicated. So I appreciate that very much. And I thought, wouldn't it be just fun if you would share a little bit of maybe some fun facts with us? We were talking before we hit the record button, and you shared some cute things with me. But please tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your life.
Well, thank you, Janice. I grew up in New York. A year after high school, I joined the military, and the Air Force was very kind to me. I got to travel around the world to places that some people only dream about. I spent quite a bit of time on Guam, Korea, the Philippines, Japan, Hawaii, Europe, as well as California. Spent quite a bit of time in California, Texas, and then eventually ended up here in Georgia in 1995. And this is where the Air Force put me to work as a trainer. I had been in the logistics field for all of that time while I was in the military. And I started training others that were coming into the career field, and found that I really loved what I was doing. Now, I've got quite a few other things that I've done along the way. A lot of theater. I did radio broadcasting for about 12 years. And as you mentioned, professional Santa Claus. But all of those things I bring in to what I do and how I help people to work through any anxieties, to help them to connect with their audience with public speaking.
I love it. And this is, you mentioned to me that, you had looked me up a little bit, and you realized that my personality that I'm known for is in pageantry. And of course that my belief is that transcends into other things, and to facilitating, to being able to really work with your passion. But I know you have a little bit of experience having been a judge in pageantry, but like what you were saying, you're teaching people to be moved by their message and to move other people with their messages. And I think that does translate into pageantry as well as to anybody out there. And I truly believe that this podcast is about finding the beauty that's inside and out. And I love talking with people like you, because finding that passion, finding that purpose, and being able to then use it like you have to make the difference in the world and the lives of others is truly inspirational. And I want to talk with you, more, about that. First and foremost is how you found what you do. How did you find that love? How did you know that you wanted to do, ultimately all the things that you're doing, but to help others present and to share their message to others and to be
that's a great question. Thank you for that, Janice. So I think I mentioned a little bit of it, that when the Air Force offered me that job to be a trainer, I was working full-time radio. I should say that I did 10 years active duty and 18 years in the reserves. And while I was in the reserves, that's when I was doing my radio, a lot of my acting. And I got to a point in radio where I found a lot of the fame, but none of the fortune. So I needed to start looking for another job. And some of the things that were going through my head at that time were public speaking. I hadn't done any public speaking, never heard of Toastmasters at that time, was thinking about maybe being a minister. I wasn't even very religious, but I felt that I had some sort of a calling to be up in front of people, but I didn't know what that was. Lo and behold, my first sergeant comes up to me and says, "Hey, would you like to be an instructor in Marietta, Georgia, at Dobbins Air Force Base to help folks that are coming into our career field?" And I said, sure. I had been doing some training in our unit because I had a lot of experience in the career field because of being in it active duty and the number of years in the reserves. And I was doing radio, I was doing theater, but both of those will give you some foundational skills to be a speaker, but certainly don't give you everything you need to know to be a good facilitator. And so I learned the craft of facilitation and designing training pretty much by the seat of my pants. But that's how I've learned everything. But once I got started in training, it just clicked. There was something about it that I connected to. And I think the biggest thing that I connected to was understanding that it's all about knowing objectives, that what are we doing? Why are we doing this? That once we complete this training, what change is supposed to occur? What problem are we trying to solve? And a lot of that came very naturally to me. And so I think that that's where I saw that I knew that I was in the right place. And now I've been a part of training and development for 30 years, and I just love it.
That's amazing. You say that you're an expert in the adult learning theory. So what is adult learning theory?
That's another great question.
For us, people that don't know, I want to know. Tell me.
Sure. Well, some of it you can kind of sort of gather from adult learning. So it's the theory behind how do adults learn, how do adults retain information, what are adults looking for, not only in a learning situation, but also in any type of engagement situation. And I think that a lot of this can be relevant in a pageant as well. There are 8 separate principles. I was first introduced to this when I started training trainers to train, starting training subject matter experts to be trainers or facilitators, or maybe be a speaker at a conference or conduct a breakout session at a conference. That's when I first was introduced to this. And then the more I dived into it, the more I saw that all speakers can use it, salespeople can use it. So basically what it is, in a nutshell, it's about creating engagement. The more that you're able to engage your audience, the more that your message is going to stick, the more it's going to resonate, the more it's going to have some sort of emotional impact on your audience. So maybe you can see the sign behind me, talking and telling ain't training or selling. How many times have you been in a seminar or a training situation and the individual who was conducting it, all they did was talk?
Yes, there was
1 hour.
No interaction whatsoever.
Yeah, and what really gets to me at the beginning, they'll say, "Oh, this is going to be really interactive," and then they just talk for 1 hour, and that people don't. Adults want to be challenged. They want to be involved. They don't want to be talked to.
I was getting ready to say that. You read my mind. That's exactly what it's like when you're being talked to. When you think about school, and I remember leaving college and graduate school thinking I never want to see another book. And I think it was because my teachers were not as engaging as I had hoped they would be. And when I did have an engaging teacher, I was like an A+ student. And then when I didn't have an engaging teacher, there was that B that just haunted me. And it's the same thing in life. When you learn a skill at work or you attend a workshop, you want to be part of the situation. You want to be engaged. You want to be interactive. You want to be involved. That's really what it comes down, is being involved. So do you mind sharing the 8 steps with us here and what that is in simple steps?
Oh, sure. Now, the one of them that immediately comes to mind when I think of a pageant, and certainly with training would be, and these are in no particular order.
Okay.
The first one I'll mention is the principle of primacy and recency. So when you hear the word primacy, what comes to mind?
Primary, most important.
Perfect. So in this case, primacy is meaning firsts, is in a presentation, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but that's one of those learning that's one of those learning techniques that if I challenge you and then you got to search through your brain for that response, and then when you get it, then it really sticks.
Yes. And I passed, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So primacy and recency, primacy talking about impactful firsts. So in training would be your opening of setting that stage. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? What are my responsibilities as the facilitator? What do I expect from you? What are the objectives? All of those things would be part of that setting the stage, an impactful story, a relevant story, again, setting that stage in a pageant. One of the things that I saw, you mentioned it briefly, and that was I was a judge. This has got to be 20, 25 or more years ago when I was working radio in Northern California, KKIS in Concord, California. I think they've since changed their call letters.
Right.
But I was asked to be a judge. And there was one young lady that stood out from everybody else in the crowd. And it was because of that poise and that impact that she had, that confidence in her eyes when she looked at each of the judges. There were, 6 or 8 of us that were judges. And that was very different. And so that kind of goes in line with that impactful first. Here's someone who's taking immediate command of the stage, is looking every judge directly in their eyes. They weren't shying away. They weren't looking down at the floor. Nobody was talking, but I should also say 93% of our message comes from our body language.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it not only someone in a pageant, but a facilitator or speaker, even before they mention their first or say their first word, we're all judging them. Look at what they're wearing. Look at that jewelry. Look at their hair. The glasses and whatever else, the shoes. Look at the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Your posture needs to be confident when you're walking in and you're presenting. You need to be approachable, but yet respected. And you're right. People do judge. They judge everything. Absolutely everything.
Everything. So getting back to the principles, the principle of primacy, that impactful first, because us humans, we remember firsts. It's easy for us to remember that first kiss or that first car or the first job or the first apartment, the first day at college. Whereas if you said, what was your third car? What was your fifth? What was your fifth week at college like? It would be a little more difficult to think about that, but that impactful first day of leaving home, my first day in the military, it's ingrained in my head. So those very impactful firsts. Primacy, recency, meaning recents. So the most recent thing, meaning the closure of a presentation, that needs to be impactful as well. It needs to be wrapped up. How many times have you heard someone speak and say, get to the end and they thank you, and then just walk off?
Yeah.
It should be a review or a call to action of some sort, maybe a giveaway, something along those lines. That's another story that kind of brings everything together again. That's relevant and impactful. So that would be one of those 8 principles that all adults are looking for: those impactful openings and impactful closures.
Right. Love it. That's so important, I think, with any message that you have. Very
Right.
good. So, okay. So, presenters need to be familiar with adult learning theory. And it sounds like that's a really great first step, I think, in people when they're thinking about even interviewing for a job, being able to, like whether it's a pageant interview or a regular interview, to be able to have that added engagement to sort of really have an objective in mind, not just deliver the information, but to really have a purpose in everything we do, which I think is so important. It really comes down to that purpose. So, you talked about your background. You shared your vast knowledge, but I have to know, because you mentioned that you were in radio and in acting. So, is that why you came to California? Because you're a performer, or is it from your job? I was just curious.
Yeah, great question. Originally, I was in California because I was with the military. I was still active duty at the time. Yeah, I was up in Northern California, halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento at Travis Air Force Base. Prior to that, I was on Guam. That was my second time on Guam. And then that's where I started radio part-time while I was still in the military. Came to Travis, was working part-time radio, and came off active duty in 1984, started working full-time for the radio station, and then was in radio for 12 years full-time after that.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask this is because I know you do some voiceover now, and you're in Atlanta, and there's a big market there. I'm from North Carolina, from Charlotte, so I'm very familiar with the market, as you have a great voice. And how important is the tonality of your voice in a presentation?
That's a great question. I think it's important. However, I think that people that, like here in the South, there are folks that have that Southern twang, but I don't see that as being at times it can be an asset. It can be used in a way that their content matches their tonality. It matches that accent. So at times it can work for them. So I think that the tonality that doesn't work is that monotone, or you can hear the anxiety in their voice, or you can hear that they're not fully utilizing everything that they have for whatever reason, nerves or sometimes they just don't know. Because that's another thing I've learned along the way, is that we don't know how everyone else hears us. I think I sound this way. You and the rest of the audience are hearing me very differently. One of the things, because of radio, I'm now very used, and now voiceover, I'm very used to hearing my voice. But when I tell people, you need to listen to yourself, you need to watch yourself on that Zoom, the best way to critique yourself is to listen, or to observe yourself. Oh no, I can't. No, my voice sounds horrible. Oh no, I can't. Well, you're not going to get better.
Right. I know it takes practice. I'm a vocalist, and it does take practice. And a lot of it is, air and, control, and that goes into it. And of course, that's, going down a whole nother avenue. But I just had to ask you, since, you have such a wonderful voice and you do work in that field, if that was part of what you do as a trainer. I was just curious, when you train the trainer, if you help them with their not only their tone, lowering their voice in some cases, especially with the female, lowering their voice a little bit, or slowing down the way they speak, I think, so that people digest the information more. I just didn't know if you had that added information, but I know that's whole different level.
Yeah.
So,
let me finish up on that. I guess, on that part, I really have not worked with folks on the tonality piece of it. Certainly pacing, projection, proper breathing. I will help them with that. I'm not a voice coach. However, what I do find that I work a lot with folks is helping them to come out of that shell of being able to get up in front and express themselves. And one of the techniques that I use for that is to imagine I'll ask them, what speakers do you admire? What actors do you admire? What is it about that actor? What is it about that speaker that you admire? Well, what I'd like you to do is now mimic that actor, mimic that speaker, because that's how I learned radio. That's how I learned radio by the seat of my pants. I was a kid that loved radio, found a way finally to get into radio. And so I started mimicking the other DJs that were on the air at the station that I worked at, DJs that I remember growing up in New York, and just mimicked them until I developed my own style, my own shtick, so to speak. So that's how I help them. But yeah, as far as the specifics about the voice, yeah, I'll bring in a vocal coach.
No, that's great. And I love the honesty. I think that's important. And you have so much to offer, and you've got that great voice. If they just mimic your voice, then they're set, I think. So you talked about engagement, and you talked about people being more interactive with, whomever they're speaking with. But what do you think that most presenters struggle with the most?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I have seen, and this is another one of those adult learning theories, it's the principle of complexity. It involves a couple of things. One is that seasoned speakers, as well as new speakers, don't realize that we all are different, that all of us learn differently. We all have different learning styles. Mm-hmm. And what happens is many times the trainer, facilitator will come into the room, and because their assumption is that everybody is just like them, they will then vomit all this information to their audience. So I would say that one of the big ahas would be learning not everybody is the same, understanding the different learning styles. And the principle of complexity is understanding what is my audience's current understanding of the subject. So to visualize this is to think about this is to visualize a swimming pool. Mm-hmm. And down on the deep end of the pool is all the complex stuff, all the stuff that this subject matter expert has learned over the many years that they have been in that career field, whatever it happens to be. They are down there at the deep end of the pool. Have you ever been in a training situation where the instructor, the facilitator, at the very beginning of the session just dove straight in to that deep end of the pool and you were lost?
Yeah.
And there's a situation where the facilitator is not clearly understanding, where is my audience? Who is my audience? What is their current level of understanding? Where are they at in that swimming pool?
They didn't set the stage for what was happening.
Exactly. Didn't set the stage. There are ways to understand where people's current understanding is by asking questions at the beginning and finding out where are they all at in that pool. And if I find out that everybody's with me at the deep end of the pool, then great. Then I can use all this complex jargon. But if I find that they're not even in the pool yet, they haven't even got dressed, they're not even in their swimming trunks yet, that they're so far outside the swimming pool, then I have to adjust the way that I facilitate for that group of people.
That sounds like me most of the time in graduate school listening to my statistic teacher, because she just dove right in the deep end. And I was like, I have no idea how to swim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's great. So you talk about audience engagement, and I understand that. And I know what it feels like to feel engaged, like I'm engaged in this conversation, and it makes it fun, it makes it interactive, and you remember and you really listen. But are there different definitions of audience engagement? How can you get that? How can you get the audience engaged, and what different ways are there to engage them?
Great question. Well, first, and this is another one of the 8 principles of engagement, is the principle of relevance. Mm-hmm. That certainly the content has to be relevant to the audience for them to emotionally connect to it. Right. Now, how you create that engagement, there are many, many, many different ways. Now, through Zoom, for example, We can use the chat. We can use polls, the whiteboard. But along with that, I think another one that's really important with the virtual world is eye contact, looking directly into that camera. Whereas if the facilitator, I'm sure it's many times, I've seen it hundreds of times where I have multiple screens, people have multiple screens, and over on this screen, I could have all of the participants are over here. And I'm talking to the participants because I see them on this screen over here. And obviously on your end over there, I'm not looking at you. And that to me, that is one of those really simple ways of engaging your audience, is looking directly at your audience. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that there are many times that we have to look away. I'm like an air traffic controller here. I've got my PowerPoint going. I've got to click on other things if I'm facilitating, doing this by myself. So there are going to be times that I am going to look away. Minimally, if I'm telling a story, I should be looking directly into that camera. If I'm asking a question, I should be looking directly into the camera. If I'm answering a question, I'm not looking down here and answering the question. I need to be looking directly at my audience. That's another cheap, easy way to connect with the audience.
Yeah, very good. Very sage advice. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you talked about how you ended up in helping, presenters with hold on one second, with their, so Cameron, take this out. My editor, take this out. I'm sorry. I just had to click on a button that popped up. Sorry about that. So you've talked about how you started in this and how you were influenced into, and you fell in love with the training aspect of it, but learning to connect people or presenters connect with their audience is a whole nother element. It's a whole nother level. It's next level presenting. Mm-hmm. How did you was that innate for you? Did you just naturally fall into that and fall in love with that, or just knew how to innately connect with an audience and teach that?
No, I was having this conversation with someone just the other day that asked me a very similar question. And I think it came from training. It came when I was early on in my career as an instructor with the Air Force. One of the things that I saw, just being up in front of people and just spitting out data, people, and just hoping it stuck to the wall, just wasn't working. There was a lot of hands-on training that went on in our instruction, working with heavy equipment, preparing cargo to be loaded onto these play airplanes that we had. Mm-hmm. And there were times that I developed scenarios. I would have a small group of airmen, 5 or 6 of them, and they would have their equipment, they would have their cargo, and I would give them their scenario. And they were already instructed on the basics of how to do this in the classroom. Now they were actually having to apply it. In the beginning, when they ran into trouble, I would give them the answer. I would show them how to work through their problem. And then it hit me that, wait a minute, these guys are adults. There's 6 of them. They've got to have enough brain power here to figure this out on their own. They've already been given the basics. So what I did was I started changing the way that I was instructing, where I was challenging them more. So that was kind of the infancy of that engagement, of not spoon feeding them, challenging my audience, questioning my audience, letting them discover the solutions for themselves, and that was making it stick. That's one engagement piece where I see myself as more of a facilitator, facilitating the group through the process, letting them discover the solutions.
Wow, I love that. I think that's the best way to do it. Let us figure it out for ourselves by guiding us and leading us to it, rather than just telling us how to do it. It's really showing you how to do it, which is a way to really sink in and to really learn. That's right. Fantastic. Well, you're obviously great at what you do. Do you have a favorite client or an ideal type of client that you work with on a regular basis, or do you just love working with everyone? I'm sure you love working with everyone, but is there an ideal client for you?
Well, I do like working with everyone. That mom that wants to get better so she can be more confident the next time she's at the PTA to give a presentation. But the client that I really love working with is someone that has a lot of technical data. And so many times I've heard, oh, this stuff is too technical. There is no way that I can train this stuff. There is no way that people can understand this stuff. The more technical it is, the more challenging it is for me. But every single time I'm able to take that material, because he has to train it. So we have to find a way to convey that information. And there's never, no is nowhere in my vocabulary. No way is nowhere in my vocabulary. We will figure out a way. So the more technical, working with IT folks, computer programmers, those types of folks, I love working with. Salespeople as well. They can use these same principles of, you think about the salesman is using a lot of training techniques, because if you're going to sell me a product, in a way, you've got to educate me about that product, but you also have to convey that message to me as the prospect. You have to convey that message to me in a way where I see the value. I see why I need this. I have now emotionally connected to this thing that you're selling me, which is another one of the principles of the adult learning theory, the principle of ownership. Do we want to talk about that one?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Yeah. So this is another one of those, all of them are important, but this is another one of those where your audience has to understand the value, the WIFM, WIIFM, just like a radio station, WIIFM. Over on the West Coast, it's all radio stations that start with a K, but here on the East Coast.
I didn't realize that. It's K on the West Coast and W on the East Coast. That's cool.
Yeah, the Mississippi River is the line.
You taught me something. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, they're all Ks over there. I think there's one K radio station in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia or something, and there may be one on the West Coast. But other than that, everything else is a K. The Mississippi River is the line. However, WIIFM, what's in it for me? The adult needs to see immediately what's in it for me. Why should I listen to you? What value does this have? What am I going to learn today? Why do I need to learn this? And if the adult doesn't see it, if they don't connect to it, they're somewhere else. They're lost.
They're lost.
So it's the same thing in sales, that if your prospect doesn't see the value, if they don't understand the value here, they're going to walk.
Wow, I love that. So our final question is, what do you love most about coaching?
I've had that rare opportunity to train many trainers, work with new trainers, work with seasoned trainers, and I always ask them that question. And all of them come back with the same response, which is my response. It's that the where they get it, where your participants get it, where sometimes you may have that challenging audience. Maybe it's the way that I'm describing it. Maybe it's just them having a bad day. But at some point, the light bing, just goes off. And all of a sudden, they get it. And there's nothing else like that.
Wow, that's wonderful. I love it. It's great when they get it. If they listen, they will get it. That is for sure. So how do we find you? How do we stalk you? How do we follow you? And how do we hire you?
Well, my website, presentyourwaytosuccess.com. And if you contact me and if you say that you saw this episode in this podcast, I am giving away a 60-minute free complimentary consultation to anyone that wants to do a tune-up on their presentation, wants to get feedback on their current presentation, wants to talk about training, maybe is struggling to design a presentation for their networking group or something along those lines. Get in touch with me through my website, presentyourwaytosuccess.com. Let me know that you heard this with Janice and you got yourself a free 60 or a complimentary 60-minute session with me. No selling. It's all about you for 60 minutes.
Love it. I'll have everything in the show notes of how to reach you. And I know there's some more social media handles I can put in there too to reach you. So thank you so much. You've been amazing. David, you're fantastic. You're the guy. I'm going to hire you for me for sure.
Well, thank you, Janice. Thank you.
Thank you.